And welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our March SciCommers Mentor Chat. It's great to see so many familiar faces and some new faces as well. So, welcome for those of you who are joining us for the first time. SciCommers is an online community of practice and professional network for scientists, engineers, ranging from undergrads to senior faculty members and researchers that originally was founded by NPR and is now hosted by the Boston University College of Communication. We are a space where researchers come together to find their voice, share resources, and bridge the gap between the lab and the public. Before we get started, a few housekeeping things. If you aren't already in our LinkedIn group, it's called SciCommers, a science community communication collective. Please join us there. It's a fantastic way to keep up the conversation going between our monthly mentor chats, and I will be sharing the link in the chat. Also, you can stay active on our Slack workspace where we share a lot of our programming, and I'll also share the link to that channel in the chat. And then we want to ensure that this network is meeting your needs. So please take a few minutes to fill out our community survey. So I will post all of those links in the chat momentarily. And here we go. Perfect. Okay. And then if you would, you can share your name and where you're joining us from. While I introduce our guest mentor for today, Dr. Emily Costa. Emily is a cell biologist who turned civic science advocate. She earned her PhD in lung cancer biology from Sloan Kettering, focusing on gene expression changes in metastasis. But while she was mastering the bench, she was also discovering a passion for the way science lives and breathes in the real world. And so she's currently a civic science associate at Rockefeller University's Rock EDU Science Outreach, which is supported by the Rita Allen Foundation. And her work centers on building frameworks that make science a justice-centered and accessible process for everyone. You might also know her as the co-host of the science comedy podcast Fax Machine, or through her work with SciComm. And today she's joining us and she's going to talk to us about from pub trivia to civic science, finding your path and your voice in SciComm. So Emily, thanks so much for being here, and I will pass it off to you.
Thank you. That was the kindest introduction, up there at least, with very kind introductions. I so appreciate that. And thanks to everyone who's hopped on the call for today. So, yeah, for kind of what I figured I'd hop in and chat with you all about, really all that came to me was just kind of sharing sort of what my own journey, my very kind of winding, serpentine journey towards and through SciComm, what that's looked like, in hopes of sort of sharing some resources and lessons that were really helpful to me along the way, in hopes of kind of expediting those for anybody else who might be doing the same thing. So yeah, I guess that's what I'll do. I'm hoping to not spend too much time talking, so that, any questions or anything that comes up at the end, we can have some nice time to delve into those. All right, so is this going to go for me? Okay, great. So as Amel said, better than I can myself by a long shot, I'm Emily. I'm a cell biologist, a civic scientist, as Amel is too, and Jen Parsons, who I also saw is here. Hi, Jen. Um, and a science communicator, currently living in NYC. So for me, I did have here that my SciComm journey began when I was in grad school. Realistically, since I was a kid, I always loved writing and telling stories, and I loved science as well. And in my head, those were very separate. And I was like, I guess I'm going to choose one over the other. And then it wasn't until grad school that I was like, oh, actually, we can recombine those again. Very cool. But more technically, it started in grad school. Um, so it was in my PhD, which was in a lab at Memorial Sloan Kettering studying lung cancer. Started that in 2016 and got into the lab, did my rotations, and then finally committed to my thesis lab and was enjoying some parts of it and not so much other parts of it. And definitely I'm the sort of person where creative outlets kind of like buoy me through other things that are kind of stressing me out or grinding me down. So I started pursuing those. one of the main ones that I encountered in a way that was totally serendipitous and a little silly was hosting pub trivia. So I went to grad school at Weill Cornell out in New York City. And RIP, there used to be a bar like adjacent to our campus that would host weekly pub trivia. At the time, it was hosted and written. So, like, original, curated, off the dome, like pub trivia by two fellow grad students at my grad school who I later became friends with and I'm still very good friends with today, named Rob and Noah. One of them was stepping down because he was starting to teach like a night course at a college down the street. And apropos of truly nothing, I was like, you know what? I can probably do this. I'll audition, put me in, coach. And then took up the reins and started hosting and writing trivia, purely from a place of just having a lot of silly knowledge in my head that I had a lot of fun sharing with other people. So that was kind of where that started. Uh, and then somewhere in there with those same two guys, Rob and Noah, because we were just like, actually, for some reason, the pub trivia is not enough of this thing that we all love to do. Let's make a podcast as well. And so we created this podcast called Fax Machine, where essentially we would, bring our favorite bits of arcane, strange, esoteric, hilarious, curiosity-sparking trivia, and just chat about it with each other. It was very much a thing like for our friends and for folks who came to the bar trivia to be like, do you want more of this? Here you go. And again, it was just a creative outlet that was really fun for us to be doing together as friends. But over its time, it became pretty apparent that the three of us being, various kinds of biologists, really had a hard time not talking about science eventually. It was a little bit like if you've ever done Wikipedia racing, which if any of what I've said appeals to you, I highly recommend it. But the premise is you set like an endpoint, like say like you want to land on an article about the French Revolution, and then you just go to a random page on Wikipedia and like click a link in each page that opens to try and like get to the French Revolution page in as few clicks as possible from where you started. We would do that, but just it would end up being about science somehow. And I'm like, we were just talking about like the unicorn horns that are in like like the Danish throne. Like, why are we talking about whale evolution right now? Um, so kind of noticed that like across the three of us and leaned into it. And sort of as that was coming together, we also had the idea to try and do a kind of live version of the podcast again, purely just for fun, kind of just for our friends. We were going to have it at Rob's, one of my co-hosts' workplace, which is a fantastic like nonprofit science education organization in New York called BioBus. Literally just like in their lab space. We got an email, I think like 2 weeks before the show was supposed to happen, from them being like, we're ripping out all the floors, so you actually can't do that. So in a first kind of like tip that I'll share here, we completely shot in the dark, cold emailed this venue that at the time had just opened, I think like a year prior in New York called Caveat, that I had heard about through a wonderful podcast, also to plug, to check them out, called The Story Collider, which is essentially the Moth, but for stories about or related to or around science. It's beautiful. But one of the co-founders of that also started a entertainment venue in New York City that, at least at its origin, was premised on creating like edutainment. So bringing in folks with scholarship related to science, history, politics, economics, the internet, just everything, and pairing them with various kinds of performers, comedians, dancers, all sorts, to create, cool art, cool kind of educational art, and performance together. So we cold emailed them and we're like, we are three scientists. We have this thing. Can we do it there? And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever. Which was crazy. But just to say, if we hadn't asked, it never would have happened. And that did shake out. It was like a Tuesday night slot, and it was incredibly fun and very cool. Our first guest was my friend's dad, who was also a chemistry teacher, and he was fantastic and easily the most charismatic of the four of us teachers. They know, they know how to work a crowd, of course. Um, and we did our first show, and we've actually been doing them ever since. We did them initially every couple of months, but we're now in our second year of doing them once a month, still at this same venue. The show has changed quite a bit since it started, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But just to say, like, a lot of serendipity and a lot of just also, trying things out and seeing what sticks. Around the same time, and I'll also note that I have years at the bottom of the slides, and they're there for a reason. And I'll circle back to them at the end. Um, but around the same time, I also, again, kind of outside of the lab, sort of, filling my cup in those other ways. Started volunteering with, again, some fantastic science outreach and education groups in the city, one of them being the aforementioned BioBus, as well as Rocky DU Science Outreach, which is where I work and where I am at right now. But essentially, in those spaces, I was primarily interfacing with kids of various ages, talking about science, talking about what it's like to be a scientist, like, being like, well, what are you curious to know? Like, we have these fruit flies under a microscope. What do you want to know about them? Like, what do you want to test? What do you want to look at? And that to me was just some of the most fun that I ever had in terms of extracurriculars outside of the lab. And I kind of realized that, I mean, I like the, crafting the stories and storytelling about science, but I also really like engaging with people in conversation and dialogue in this way of like, actually, I want you to guide this and I want you to have as much fun as possible. Um, that was something that I kind of clocked through those experiences, like, oh, this is really resonating and it's very important to me. And then this is a very busy slide, but basically the TLDR is COVID happened, as we all know. And like very luckily, in the first couple of months of the shutdown, which I also realized recently was around this time, that many years ago, um, my work was at a bench with a pipette and some cells floating around in liquid. So if I couldn't be in the lab, kind of couldn't really do anything. I wasn't at a point yet where I was working on any papers. I didn't have like a grant that I was cooking up. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just go nuts on SciComm for a couple of months because my PI isn't here and he can't he can't see what I'm doing. So that's what I did. That was in hindsight kind of like a nice sort of like incubator period of just exploration. There's a whole bunch of stuff here, but essentially I kind of started putting feelers out and just dipping into various spaces and seeing and trying things and seeing what I liked. I was definitely more tilted towards science writing and science journalism in this time. I think partly just because like the paths to engage with that were a bit more clear to me. And also just kind of like the visibility of the sort of resources with communities such as SciCommers, by the way, that's also when I got in kind of in that network and in touch with them. So just to share, like, there's a great online course that I really enjoyed called Scope. I don't know if it still exists, but I might email them and see if they can put it back up because it was fantastic. The Open Notebook, was really digging into a book that they had. I think actually it was a few years after that, but like all the resources on their website about science writing, about journalism, about demystifying the process basically and entry points into it. Yay, I'm so glad Scope exists. Okay, thank you. I recommended it to someone recently and I was like, actually, I don't know if it's still around. So I'm so glad I didn't, at least in that instance, turn them astray. Awesome. Um, Love that. So yeah, so there's that. Still volunteering with the outreach groups that I mentioned. I wrote for a blog called Oncobites, and I'll talk more about the Bites blogs in a little bit. But they were a fantastic place to kind of just try out science writing, at least for me, in a sort of field that I was familiar with as a budding cancer biologist. Um, Engaged with the National Association of Science Writers and their virtual conferences. Through that, I met two ultimately fantastic mentors that through meeting with them, that was kind of my first sense of like, oh, I can kind of just do this and try it. And like, there's no sort of threshold of bona fides that I have to hit in order to be kind of like a valid person trying to do science journalism work and work in this space, which is another idea I'll return to. But that, at least personally, was a big realization. Um, Also got involved with CompSciCon in this time, first attending and then just kind of co-organizing conferences. And I'm still around with them. I'm like a bad penny. They can't get rid of me. Um, just various other kind of like places of science writing. This Atlas Obscura book, which is delightful, but that was like a very fun kind of foray into like, I'm going to pitch and write a thing and we'll see what happens. And I have Uber on there because that I didn't drive for Uber, but that was another surprising space that really sort of sparked some reflection and realization for me. And that at the time, I was dating someone, I was living in Manhattan, dating someone who was out in Brooklyn. And trying to still like, I luckily was able to kind of get tested because I worked in affiliation with the hospital. So I was like, all right, I'll get my test. We're good. I'll go visit them for a bit. And so I was traveling in Ubers a lot, like at that time, just out of caution. And what would happen, not all the time, but a good amount of times, is you'd be in an Uber and, you'd be driving with somebody chatty, which is my favorite. I'm like, I do want to chat at all times. Let's chat. And they'd be like, what do you do? And I'd be like, oh, I'm a scientist. I work at Sloan Kettering. Oh, well, do you know any of this stuff about what's going on? And I'm like, I don't understand all of it, but here's what I've read and here's what I do know. And like those conversations were were great. They were really, really great. And it was kind of like, again, sort of like a note to myself of like being in dialogue about this. And again, kind of like being in a space where the person who I'm speaking to is kind of leading the conversation and we're just sort of meeting each other where we are, is a very like comfortable and pleasant like space of science communication for me. So as mentioned through all of this, I will briefly detour about ComSciCon because I do have to plug them. Only in that if folks here are not aware of them, you gotta be. They're great. So very quickly, I'll just say ComSciCon of those things was one of the most transformative, I would say, in terms of experiences that I was able to have. I just plugged kind of like a little stats thing from a recent presentation that I gave on them, but essentially they run workshops all around the US and the world at this point, which is wild to me. Our next fancy flagship workshop is in France this summer, which is very exciting. But for graduate students who are excited about science communication, it's a space where you can come, you can build your network, you can learn from science communication experts, you can share your own work and get feedback, you can find collaborators. Part of it is everybody develops an original piece of SciComm. It's wonderful. I know at this point so many folks who have gone on to kind of like develop that part of their work as their career, and ComSciCon was kind of like an inciting incident for them to be like, oh, I can do this, and now I know folks who I can continue to network and build relationships with that will help me advance this part of my work. Um, we have a lot of chapters. All of the events are free to attend with at least partial travel support. Sometimes full if you go to like a more local workshop and don't have to go as far. But free to attend, free room and board, food. Like grad students are not infamous for having a lot of money, so that's a top priority of ours. But just to plug, they're wonderful. Highly recommend checking one out near you. You can see on our website where all the workshops are. Um, yeah, it's a really cool space for folks that haven't done that. But as mentioned, in this period, I kind of just started trying to do all sorts of different things and had a moment, towards the end of this period, we'll say 2023, where I was kind of trying to take stock and be like, all right, of all these things that I've tried, what really stands out as kind of resonating with me as like an experience that still again, like kind of filled my cup in a way that really stands out. And it was back to this kind of central theme of I do love words. I love working with words. I love crafting stories, but even more so, I like working with people. And so it was what I was able to do in some ComSciCon as like a conference co-organizer, planning responsive and um, accessible programming for fellow graduate students like me who are kind of like siloed in their own institutions and labs and being like, I really love SciComm, but can I do this? Are there other people who do this? Working with those folks, having those conversations informally with folks wherever I could, whenever they were generous with their attention and wanted to have those conversations, I was always grateful. Volunteering, with organizations I was getting to volunteer with, and even through Fax Machine as well. Fortunately, we were a podcast, so pretty amenable to everyone being in their own places and recording audio. But in that period too, we started bringing a lot of other scientists onto the show and interviewing them and talking to them about their work. And because it was who we knew, a lot of those folks were also graduate students, trainees, early career scientists. And it was kind of like, hey, your work is really cool and you're really cool. And now this can be a platform where we can share that out so that other folks who might not necessarily get to know you or hear from you can do that. That was incredibly satisfying too. So that was kind of what stood out there. Um, and I will say, like, I think in terms of sort of like the threads that I've now been pulling on more so in terms of the work that I'm doing now, that again, that theme of just kind of doing this with and for other people more directly. I still love science writing and journalism, but I think that kind of feedback portion of it was what always felt a little bit missing to me. But certainly, with ComSciCon, again, just like in the various capacities that I've had there, and now like on the leadership team and in another project that I'll share in a little bit called Seeds. A lot of that was just felt by being inspired by my peers, like finding a community of other graduate students who really cared about this and who cared about charting these opportunities and access points for folks just like us, to be able to engage with this kind of work. I mean, it's all volunteer run, and I'm like, I love this team. I love these folks are as obsessed about this as I am, and that we're creating really cool and helpful stuff together. Um, and again, building programs that are responsive. I think even that's been a very good set of kind of like learning for me, as an organizer in terms of like, let's check in with our attendees. All right, we have someone who's breastfeeding. Like, all right, let's set up a room for this. We're going to do that. What accessibility points do we need here and there and there? Like, those are among another tip that I'll have at the end, like the various sort of like skills and kind of like know-how that I've developed just from, again, trying a lot of different things that I really value now. Um, and another version of that is fax machines. So I mentioned that the show has changed a lot over time. It is now a monthly show, but we always feature invited guest scientists, comedians, folks who just are really excited by whatever science they're talking about. Our definition of expert is like incredibly broad, and I only ever want that to be the case. But I have a tough time like listening back to old episodes of Fax Machine because I hear in my own speaking that like I'm trying to sound authoritative in a way that I feel like I should as a scientist talking about science. And honestly, doing the show has become so much more enjoyable to me. And I think from talking to folks resonant with other people, in that over time, I've really eschewed that. And I'm like, you know what? I am sharing a stage with people. Each of our shows is a different theme in science. I'm just a cell biologist. I don't know about astronomy. I don't know about physics. Like, we had a show about volcanoes, and I'm like, they're just scary. I purposefully don't know anything about those. Like, I'm just like, all right, I'm used to sharing a stage with folks who know so much more than I do. I write trivia questions for them. They knock them all out of the park because it's their thing, not mine. And so any opportunity that I have to be like, so I did some reading, I read some papers, this is kind of what I gleaned. I'm not really totally sure if this is how this works, but please fact check me. Or like, please, oh, well, actually, like, oh my God, yeah, let me know. Like, I love, like sharing that airtime with my guests as much as possible. In the show too, like my favorite moments, and our show kind of has this vibe to it, which I'm really proud of. Like our audience is very vocal. And if they have questions, they'll shout them out like they'll engage. Like they'll, obviously like we'll shout out answers. Like I'm just the more that I can pull other voices into that conversation, the more fun it is for me. And I also just really enjoy kind of creating that and having that be a dynamic that exists of like, everybody who is here is leaving having learned something new. There is not a sense where it's like, these people are here and they're telling you everything and you know everything. Like it's very, yeah. I think like that wasn't even necessarily sort of like the intention as I changed my performance style, but it was kind of like I realized in myself that that feels more natural and more fun and more me. And that ended up being, I think, like a mutually sort of nice situation for other folks who are there as well. Um, so just to say, yeah, I love the chance when I get to be like, I'm uncertain about this, or scientists are uncertain about this. Here are the caveats, like this, like this might be happening or that might be happening. It's not clear cut. But also this person knows a lot more about it than me. Like, when you talk about your colleagues, like what do you guys feel about this kind of stuff? Like being able to get into those squishy spaces too. is just a lot of fun. And I've realized that's kind of a way that I like to communicate. And then the kind of other sort of main thread, I think the biggest thread that's kind of like been the undercurrent of like what I really most care about. And I'm kind of like, all right, this is actually my niche here. This is my favorite thing, is thinking about how we can support and prepare scientists to engage with other folks in these ways, like have their science communication be something that is more dialogue based, more open, something that they can feel confident doing and not feel like they have to act out a role that doesn't resonate with them or embody some kind of vision of a scientist that doesn't resonate and feel true to them. So one space that I've had the opportunity to learn more about that and engage with those ideas, as Emil mentioned, is the Civic Science Fellows Program. I have absolutely loved being there, thinking about kind of like the curriculum, the ways that we talk about this sort of like science and society interfacing kind of work, how folks can engage with each other most effectively, like what listening and co-creation actually looks like in practice, and not just a line that you write on a grant to make it sound good, although I guess maybe not so much anymore, fortunately. Um, but some of that work has taken place there. It's been fantastic. At Rocky DU, I've also been able to produce and construct some programming around working with scientists, most often trainees here, to talk about their research in a way that is, again, like nuanced, aware of the kind of broader social context that it exists in, and also authentic to who they are as people, which I always think helps you connect better to your audience because they're also people. So I've had a lot of fun doing that with this series called Data for the People, this webinar series, as well as a podcast called Beyond the Lab. So they were working with high school students who are interviewing PIs and not asking them about their science. And that's been so fun because it always kind of puts them on like on their back foot. And they end up being really gorgeous, like insightful conversations. I also co-organize a community of practice of all the science communicators in New York City. That definition, I think in general, but especially being here where you have this confluence of, of tech and the arts and business and education and just everything. That definition here is so broad and I love it. So we bring in folks from all sorts of different spaces, from journalism to museum educators to folks in like higher ed or academia, to more creative performance oriented people. And we just bring them together as a community of practice to kind of offer mutual support, resource sharing, that kind of thing. And then Seeds, which is a project that we're running through ComSciCon with gracious funding by the Kavli Foundation and the Rita Allen Foundation, where we are elevating and highlighting and celebrating the stories of basic scientists who have gone above and beyond and really taken intentional and actionable steps to really understand the ethical implications of their research, and bring that understanding back into how they do their research. Not an easy thing in general, unless it's like mandated by some kind of like IRB type board, but especially in basic science where, those applications are often more removed or more or less tangible. This was something that one of our funders is really keen to learn more about. So we've had a blast kind of talking to scientists to understand this, sort of share out their experiences, distill some learnings and advice that can be shared with the broader community. And also all of the sort of interviewing and writing of these profiles is being done by early career scientists who we've kind of enrolled in like a mini fellowship program. So it's been incredibly fun to work with them too. And again, yeah, hopefully, put out more future scientists into the world who have these skill sets, who have the confidence in themselves to do them, to communicate about their science in this way, to engage with folks outside of their niche fields in these ways. That for me is what really excites me, I think, any opportunities that converge on that kind of work. But this is, now, but I still am grappling with kind of, how I want to do this and how much. One thing that might be obvious, it wasn't to me until I was like, what is this feeling that I'm having? Oh, that's the feeling. I sometimes don't have a lot of room for my own science communication anymore, in the realm of sort of doing a lot of kind of program building and management, which I love, but I'm kind of like, oh, that piece of me is being a little left to the wayside, and I kind of miss her. And also as you know, everybody who's interested in science communication eventually hits, trying to figure out if there's a way that I could make a job out of this or bring this into a job. Um, and I think there are a lot of ways, but certainly like arguing that these skills are translatable, I think is absolutely a thing. And I think in a way that is both exciting and intimidating. I'm finding that there are a lot of different ways that I can translate these skills in different sectors, in different types of careers. But that's also something that's very squishy and ongoing for me right now. All right, I'll try to fly through these last bits, but I sort of tried to bring up kind of the things that I've learned along the way that might be helpful to share. I frame them as tips and reassurances, both for you and also kind of for me as well. Still things that I find myself kind of reminding myself. Um, One of them, I kind of alluded to this before, you are qualified to be a science communicator. Just do it. I think for me, I pinpointed this as coming from a place where, like, being in academia, being a grad student, your qualifications, your credentials behind you really do kind of validate like your comfort in being in a kind of space and like claiming to have some level of expertise. Again, do I necessarily agree with that? No, but I think it's safe to say that is often how it is. Like, oh, like, well, I was in this person's lab and I studied this research there and there and there. Like all of those things add up in a way that gives you more clout or less clout. So it was really a big mindset shift for me, that I encountered as I spoke to more folks, again, who were in science journalism or scientists turned journalists, that no, literally, you just start writing, you just start pitching, you just do stuff. Like there's no threshold of like bona fides or qualifications or expertise. Like you hit the pavement and you do it. You get rejected a bunch, but you keep trying again, and then you just break in kind of that way. So, there's, I guess, a flip side to it, but that, yeah, was a serious mindset shift for me. In terms of where to start, anywhere. I think I would say. I mean, I think a lot of it is just sort of getting your work out there and demonstrating it, and also for yourself having the experience of like going through the process, practicing and honing and just learning as you go. I did mention Oncobytes. So there are these fantastic blogs that I do want to plug called Science Bites. Um, they, as you can see, exist for so many different fields of science. They're, from what I can tell, I think like entirely, again, like trainee run, like grad students, postdocs. There might be some early career faculty on some of them, but they're field specific, volunteer run. And it's just a space for folks who want to try out science writing about the stuff they know about in their fields to be able to do that. And then you get a byline, you get published somewhere, you can show it. So it's great because they're again buying for the folks who are learning to trying to cultivate these skills and cultivate this writing presence. So I highly recommend. They're a great starting place. Um, Also, if you're more oriented or just want to try out, more kind of presentation-based way of talking about your science that is different from how you would during a lab meeting or during a conference. The nature of these varies with the place. I just popped a few examples onto here, but certainly there are local science cafes that you might be able to tap into, science outreach groups and organizations. Lectures on Tap is taking over so many cities by storm right now. And insider info, they pay really well. So I would definitely recommend doing those. The on taps are wonderful as well. Astronomy on Tap, I think, exists in quite a few different places. Taste of Science, also in a lot of different places in the US, and Nerd Night. These are just spaces to, again, kind of talk about your science in a way that is a little informal, a little different. And a lot of them have portions that are Q&A, so you can also engage with folks who are in your audience as well as you talk. As mentioned, literally you just start pitching. You just have to start writing, and if you want to, like, start writing and start pitching. I'm kind of resharing sort of the resources that I mentioned earlier as places to learn more about the process and what that looks like. But yeah, like again, the notion of sort of you can do this, and also you actually aren't supposed to come in with like a fully written, like, I have thought out this article, it is done, it's a final product, is great. You don't actually are not supposed to do that. They don't want you to do that. The comfort of just being able to pitch what you know and what you're thinking and what your ideas are, and share that and level on folks with that is in general, I think, a great skill to have. But that's really all you need to start writing and doing science journalism, which really blew my mind. Um, I always like to plug literary and art magazines because science communication and science writing and isn't just journalism. Lean into the spaces and the media types that really resonate with you already, I think is a nice way to go. And then I'll plug too that, you can think about how to communicate your science better and effectively in the places that you're already doing it as a scientist for folks who are here who are scientists. My soapbox is, which I think I have later in here as well, is that like skills related to good science communication are good anywhere, anywhere that you're communicating your science, whether it's to a non-science audience or a non-field specific audience or within your fields, it translates. And that's also a great place to start practicing and thinking about how you can craft your communication. And I just want to flag a few that have sort of built-in modes for feedback and editing. The last one might as well, but I'll be honest, not so much in my experience. So, but maybe if you have some folks who can give you feedback in the lab, that's great. Um, but the Bytes blogs, certainly if you pitch to a media outlet, those spaces will also have opportunities for you to work with an editor. And that is also really, really helpful for refining your skill set in science communication. Um, I always liken kind of how I go about this to chemotaxis, which is the sort of idea that this is an example with a bacterium, but you have a kind of chemoattractant that exists sort of like in a gradient in an organism's environment. And say it's like a tasty treat or a nutrient. And as its concentration starts to increase, then if the creature can sense it, it'll start going that way and being like, oh, wait, this is the thing that I want is over there. And that's, I think, an okay way to be with your SciComm. Try new things, feel for what you like, and kind of wiggle in that direction, and just keep doing that. Yeah, I think it's not so much advice, but just sort of like be comfortable with that process because I think that's what it looks like. And a big piece of that is checking in with yourself often, being like, does this resonate with me? Is this actually making me feel in a way that I want to keep exploring? Is this type of SciComm not really for me? All of those things are good to keep in mind as you go. I think another thing that can often be sort of something that is like a little bit of a hurdle is like the finding your people and also knowing that when you do that, that is actually those connections are mutually beneficial. Especially when you're someone who kind of sees yourself as you're on the outside, you're trying to break in, you're trying to learn from them. They have a lot to gain from knowing you as well. So always keep that in your mind. Find your people, find the models and the mentors, the folks who have like carved the paths that you're thinking about yourself. Um, Really helps to increase the density of opportunities that are just in your orbit. Again, in that period when I was just kind of like hyper exploring SciComm, I just subscribed to a lot of newsletters. I joined SciCommers, and it was like, oh, now I don't really have to look quite as far for new things to try. And that's really nice because we don't have time. If you can have things arrive in your inbox and not Google them, fantastic. So sign up for this stuff, make the connections that can really help with finding opportunities. And also for folks who are like in the same boat as you, especially, it's a way to find collaborators, find accountability partners, be like, all right, I'm trying to do this, you're trying to do this. Let's lock in and work on it together. And also just support. I think CompSciCon was a space where I really have seen that happen more often than not, where there's something so powerful and being someone who's really passionate about something in a space where like you're kind of cultivating those skills or finding out how to do that yourself and finding someone else who's doing that as well and being like, all right, I'm not alone. I'm not nuts for being interested in this and trying to do this. And we can support each other in our journeys for it. And again, you also have a lot to offer. Anybody who you reach out to, a journalist you want to talk to, they're trying to write about science. And if you could be a source for them, they're going to be really, really stoked to talk about you. You never know down the line, how these connections can be useful on either side of them. So definitely don't let that be a barrier to reaching out. Um, I mentioned the idea of being or chemotaxing. I think part of that is also being in dialogue with yourself, especially when it comes to figuring out what your voice feels like in your SciComm and what feels authentic and natural to you. Communicating is an iterative process. It starts with you just doing that, like putting pen to paper or voice to mic or whatever form of it that resonates with you. But also like lean into the fact that you're experimenting and learning about yourself as well, as you're doing that in terms of what feels right, you know, yeah, what kind of voice rings truest. I mentioned that again, like I don't like hearing myself in earlier episodes of Fax Machine because I'm like, that was me trying to put on someone else's voice that I felt that I needed to be putting on. And it took a bit to kind of recognize that and be like, no, actually, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this way. This is the way that feels most authentic. And I think also resonates more with other people too, because again, I think being, yeah, when you're true, other folks can sense that as well. Um, and again, yeah, like throughout, note how you feel, what formats, like language, ways of speaking, ways of expressing yourself, tones resonate most. I've taught, working with folks at Rockefeller and scientists, I'm like, I do like science comedy, but like if your instinct is not to be super jokey about it, if you want to be more earnest, if you want to be more persuasive or insight or what have you, lean into what's most natural to you. That will always go over the best, because whoever you're speaking to will be able to sense that you're being honest, you know. So yeah, lean into what you already love and feel confident doing. Um, and then also a way that's really helpful in figuring this out is being in dialogue with others. Like one thing that I always encourage folks to do is talk about your science with people who know you really well, and then ask them what they heard from that and what they take away. Um, what do they repeat back to you when you do that? And not just in terms of the content, but in terms of like your affect and how you're saying it and what they could sense from you and about you as you were talking about it. This happened recently in Seeds, where one of our writers, we had like a little feedback session and it was really, really cool. We read folks' drafts and then got together and shared feedback and did kind of like a peer coaching sort of like shared exercise. And she talked about her interview, sort of like just sharing the experience back with us. And we were all sitting there just like, this inspired you so much and lit such a passion in you, and I love it. We don't hear it when we read your case studies. Like it's here. Oh my gosh, it's there. I love this. I really want to hear this. And like you can absolutely can share this. And I think, I mean, it's resonating with us all so much hearing you talk about it in this way. We would love to read this in the way that you're writing about it as well. And that to her was really meaningful. And I think it was also a validation of like, oh, right, I can write about this in the way that I feel about it. And it actually is better that way. I was like, yeah, absolutely. And she told me more recently, she's like, oh yeah, I just threw it all in the trash and then woke up one morning being like, this is how I'm going to write about it and redo the whole thing. And I'm like, I'm very excited to see this now. But truly like folks who know you, like they can be the ones to be like, as I kind of wrote it here of like sensing what parts of you shine more brightly or dimly, like through your SciComm and let you know like, hey, the way that you talk about this doesn't quite match how you're writing about it here. And it's so powerful to hear you talk about it in the way that you do. How can we align that more? Um, and I'll, as a last note, like I think this is a kind of through line for this too, is also, again, like for folks who come from an academic science background, a lot of this is kind of digging up and undoing the ways that we're taught to talk about science in academia. I think in a lot of ways that can make SciComm more challenging if we lean into those things of like separating yourself away from the work, using the passive voice, not identifying someone who is, doing the work in the lab and figuring the things out and troubleshooting the experiments, coming from a place of like, here is all the evidence and it's ironclad and my claims match them perfectly. And like, see, you don't have any questions here. Like, any normal person is going to be like, okay, what are you trying to hide right now by putting all this in front of me? So yeah, a lot of it is unpacking sort of those ways that we're taught to speak, and knowing that when you're trying to talk to someone as a person, don't want to really be talking about to them like you would as you're writing a manuscript. And that could be really hard because it's really like locked into you to communicate in a certain way. Um, my little last piece on this bit was just Chris Fleming, I love him. He's a comedian. A new special just came out on HBO that is fantastic that he's in. And his sense of humor is really densely packed with like cultural references and really like witty and just like hyper specific, but it works so well. Like he can just pluck things out of the air and they just fit perfectly with whatever joke that he's making. And there's a recent interview with him where he said this. It's like not that crazy of a thought, but it did hit me for some reason really well. which is just like, the interesting thing about being a person is you write things and you think, well, no one's going to get this. But if it comes from a person's mind, there will be people who like it. And that you can trust in that the fact that you are a person has your own lived experiences and is going through the world, like if you're talking and speaking and communicating from that place, other people will resonate with that and will get you because they are also people. Um, I don't know if it's that like deep an idea, but it just hit me a little bit to read it. So I thought I'd mention it here. Um, okay, I am speaking so much more than I thought I would. I apologize. Uh, I'll just quickly wrap up with these. Just to note that, yeah, in terms of like what to communicate about, stories are everywhere. No two are the same. Like certainly the easiest way, again, like I guess I'm realizing now this is kind of oriented towards academic scientists, so I'm sorry for those who are not, but like in your everyday orbit, certainly talks that you go to, like we go to those all the time, published research. Um, you know, all of those is material for stories. One project that I did a few years ago that kind of opened my mind to an interesting and very cool place to look for stories that like sometimes they're written about, often by the institutions that house them. But there's so much that you can find just looking there are like digitized archives. Those are becoming ever more and more a thing at various libraries and museums. This was for a project that I did in collaboration with an animator and the Science History Institute in Philadelphia, where they digitized a bunch of photos about essentially like women in scientific spaces, and like were able to dig up their names. And so I was like, oh, I'm now going to stalk them all too and see what we can find out. So there are always like surprisingly a lot of stories that are just hidden in these sort of spaces where, again, museums, libraries have these vast collections. They throw them online, and so you just kind of need to dig through them if that's your thing. But just a plug, that was something that I kind of became aware of through this project. Um, and just to note too that just because something's already been covered, if it's your area of expertise or not, or the kind of science you like to talk about, that doesn't mean that you can't cover it. Your angle and your own perspective are valuable. And kind of going back to the idea of like, you're a person with a mind and your mind might resonate with other people's in different ways. Like the way that you talk about something might connect more with somebody than the way that others are. And so there's always value in bringing your own voice to the conversation, even if it's something that's being talked about a lot in other places. Uh, yes. Okay. Sorry. Now I'm still going. In terms of how to think about your audience, this could be an entirely different, like separate talk. But I kind of just distilled it as like, put the effort in to understand and show care for your audience. And like that, again, your audience varies with what you're doing. Your audience is not and doesn't have to be everyone. And in fact, it kind of never is. And if you think it is, then it kind of usually means you just haven't really thought about who your audience actually is. Not in like a negative way, but just the idea of like, I'm talking about science for the public. The public has so many different types of people with different lives and different motivations and different ways of seeing the world that if you're just kind of writing for everyone, you're writing for no one. Um, so really, it is worthwhile to really think about who you're speaking to. What's in it for them? Why would they give you their attention, and be interested to engage with you? And how you can best meet them, both in terms of like, what they might be coming into the conversation with, but also the places like, different forms of accessibility. Like your job is to not only communicate, but also like meet them where they are. Like they don't need to come to you. You want to come to them. Create space for mutual learning, before, during, after your SciComm. That's how it turns out the best. Both in terms of you being able to, again, like really shape it for the people that you're speaking to, but also because then you get to learn as well. And then also whoever you're speaking to gets to can have like that agency, and it can be a space of mutual relationship building and trust. Um, and in terms of your audience, consider places where you might be similar or might be different to them, and how that appears in your SciComm. Uh, Another resource to plug among so many, is this fantastic thing called the Reflexivity Workbook. So reflexivity is a concept big in civic science. We love reflexivity. Is just this notion of examining all of the intersecting identities, beliefs, practices, and motives that you might have. And it is quite an exercise to do because I feel like there are so many that each contains so many that it's easy to overlook them. Be like, oh, yeah, actually, that is me. That's right. But really examining those things and then thinking about how they influence, like essentially your positionality and how it influences how you act, what you do, how you communicate, and then thinking about that in terms of the folks who you're communicating with as well. So, fantastic resource, cutest graphic design in the world. Highly recommend. Um, this one, again, another kind of unpacking academic instincts one, but get comfortable sharing half-baked ideas. It's actually a strength. Um, obviously for yourself and to kind of like keep yourself on the path that you want to be on and hold to your values, know what's guiding you and what you want to do writ large. Have ideas for getting there, absolutely, but leave room for input and iteration. And this is like, again, from the audiences, from collaborators, from folks who are supporting your work with capacity and resources. Um, it doesn't look underprepared to be that way. It conveys that you're actually open to truly co-creating something with someone. Um, so in any situation like that where you're trying to, again, build with another person in these varying capacities, and like I said, that includes your audience, think about where your interests align with theirs. Start with the shared priorities and values and think about where you can build together. I have seeds up here because seeds to me was like a very eye-opening example of this. As a project, this came together with us directly conversing with the Kavli Foundation, who was like our first funder for it, essentially saying like we came to them with a proposal. They're like, we're not going to fund that, but but you guys are cool. And we'd really love to learn more about how basic scientists are engaging with ethics. So like, and because there's hardly any scholarship about it, and that would be a really cool gap to fill. And we were like, heard, brilliant. Okay, well, we'll bring this to the table. We both really care about this and thinking about how we can like, help folks develop their science communication skills to kind of unearth this work and tell these stories. How can we bring what we all care about, what we're all capable of to the table and create something together? And the notion of being able to do that with somebody who was funding our work um, was not something I was aware that you could do. That was incredibly cool. But I think also being able to show that you are open to that opens you up to more opportunities because then folks can say, okay, I mean, you can never know like what all of someone else's priorities and what they are. But by leaving room for that kind of co-iteration and co-creation, it allows them to bring them into the conversation and say, well, okay, I mean, I like where you're going with this. Do you think we could work this in as well? Or what if we did it that way? Like, if you come up with like here's the plan, this is what I want to do. Like, do you want to fund it or not, or work with me or not? Then like, there's not any room for that. So truly not having a concrete plan is actually better. More opportunities and we'll make them work better, more resonant, like more sustainable overall. This I already mentioned, but yeah, all the skills are translatable. If anybody tells you otherwise, they're just wrong. And I feel very comfortable saying that. And then I think this reiterates a little bit from earlier as well, but like truly put yourself out there. We only have so much time. You don't have to volunteer for like a million different things and like, dedicate effort, time, resources to things, but just even stuff that can just passively come your way and like let you know what's going on or what you can check out if you want to. Um, Reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, ask if they could chat with you for 15 minutes just to bounce some ideas and get to know about, their path in SciComm, what have you. All of that's worthwhile, and it'll pay off in ways that you can't imagine. And then, oh yes, and then just kind of like for shooting your shot, things that are call outs for like, we're looking for science communicators, we're looking for scientists who do this, apply. Like, again, you never know what sort of the full depth of like what, the folks behind these opportunities, what they're really looking for, what they really care about, especially if you're a scientist doing this work. I mean, a lot of foundations that fund science that also have like science and society or science communication arms that all have projects where they're like, oh yeah, we would love to like work with or provide resources to a scientist who can be out there and like be adding a voice to the conversation about this topic area that we're interested in. So it's not even necessarily they're looking for like a specific portfolio. Like they might just be looking for you as you are. And it's always worth applying because you don't ever really know that. And the last one was just back to the years. You got time. What I shared started in like 2016. Clearly, I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm still figuring a lot of stuff out. Um, And you have a lot of time to figure out what you like to do and what you want to do and how you want to put your energy out into the world and into your SciComm. So there's no rush. There's no need to kind of be the sort of end game if we want to be a science communicator. The more I get into it, I feel like the more apparent it becomes that there is not an end game because there's always more stuff to do and learn. But just, yeah, know that you have time. Okay. That was it. I talked the entire time. I'm so sorry. Um, any questions? And also, I'm glad to share my email and connect with folks afterwards as well for that.
Thank you so much, Emily. And don't apologize. Please, we really appreciate the generosity of your time and how much you shared from your personal experience. It was super powerful, and I really, really appreciate it. Your energy is just so good and contagious. I always love being around you because you. I always leave
Likewise.
inspired. I leave inspired from you, Emily. So thank you so much. I'll open it up for anybody who has questions. Feel free to put any questions in the chat or take yourself off of mute. And I'm always ready with questions, so I'll pop us off with the first one. So for some people who struggle with imposter syndrome, when they try to be funny or creative or just, communicate about science, how did you learn to trust your own voice, especially when moving and navigating between your PhD program and then something like comedy podcast about like science? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, I don't even think it's necessarily getting to a point of like, oh, I do this great. I can go into this space and talk this way and it's fine. I think it was more so just being open to criticism and growth and getting things wrong as part of the process, and welcoming them and kind of looking forward to them after a while too. Sort of like I I still feel like an imposter in all the spaces that I'm in. I'll just say that too. But I love situations where I can again kind of like as I tweak how I perform and see how people respond to it, like during a fax machine show or afterwards, and be like, okay, that was good. That was better than how I used to do it. I'll keep doing that. Like, I think a lot of it is just sort of being open to that growth. And I don't think that that makes you any less of a professional. It just, if anything, it makes you more of one because, if you continue getting better, that shows that you actually care about what you're doing.
But yes, I agree totally. Your talk mentions pub trivia. In what ways do those informal spaces, high energy settings prepare you for those conversations that you have with funders or institutional outreach
Mm.
and organizations and that more serious work? How do you think those performances help prepare you for that?
I think pub trivia is the most extreme example. But a great thing about pub trivia, you're in a bar, folks are drinking as you do in a bar, and they're being competitive. If they're unhappy with what you're asking them about, or they think that you graded them, they'll let you know. They don't keep it to themselves. And I think like part of sort of being in those spaces where it's like you're putting something out there like for other people to consume, like it is kind of a contract, especially for facts, which I'm so conscious of this. Like you, bless you, you spent some of your hard-earned like New York City money to spend an hour and a half here tonight. Like, all right, I got to make this worthwhile. Like, like this is the other end of the contract. So it kind of teaches you to sort of be like it's kind of like a listening thing, I guess I would say. Like I think it has taught me to sort of be very like cognizant of like how folks are receiving and responding to and what they're giving back to me. Um, in those places of performance from a place of kind of like, all right, this is playing better than that. This is going over well. Um, Part of that is, just kind of like, and then it becomes almost improvisational. Like you kind of learn how to sort of adjust what you're doing and saying and what your approach is like in the moment. And I think that does help with conversations in the other spaces in general. This kind of like, I think it's called deep listening or active listening. But this notion of just kind of like, I'm coming into this space with an ear towards co-creating, towards really like doing my best to convey to you where I'm coming from and trying to listen deeply from you and ask the right questions to understand where you're coming from and where we can meet and what we can build there. And so I think that it helped in that way, I would say.
Wonderful. anyone from our crowd, if anyone has any questions, I am going to place in the chat our next month's mentor chat preview. It's going to be on April 9th with Dr. AJ Hinton. He's an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University, and he's going to be talking to us about science storytelling from the lab bench. He also has his own lab at Vanderbilt called the Hinton Lab, and he does a lot of fascinating work there with mitochondria and a lot of really technical STEM stuff that is above my um, competence. But Dr. Hinton's a really amazing person. He's very wonderful, and he's going to share with us how he communicates his science from the bench to others and different audiences. So register for that using that registration link in the chat. Emily, thank you so very much for your candid and insightful session today. I think you've given us a lot to think about regarding how to show up as humans, as people, not just as scientists. So thank you so much for coming today. And everyone else, we look forward to seeing you next month. Take good care, everyone. Thank you.
You all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Yay. Bye.